Hello, dear wanderer. Before we begin, allow me to set aside the scroll for a moment and address you not as a storyteller to a listener, but as one person to another. Every story I record here is a message in a bottle, and I never know for sure in whose hands it will end up. Perhaps you are listening to me, wrapped in a blanket somewhere in rainy London, or falling asleep to the hum of an air conditioner in hot Dubai. Or maybe it's early morning in Tokyo, and you're trying to get a little rest before work. It is incredibly important for me to know who you are. It makes our quiet evening circle real. Please, if you have a second, write just 2 words in the comments. Your city and how you found us. Sydney, YouTube recommendation, or New York, was searching for sleep stories. It will be like a slight nod in the dim light, a sign that we are here together. And if this corner of silence has become important to you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next journey. Now let's turn up the wick of this old lamp, dim the light, and set off to where time flows more slowly. The Valley of Narcissus, the records of a Roman perfumer. The silence of my workshop before dawn is special. It is not an absence of sound, but a thick, viscous substance in which the last dreams of the night drown and the first thoughts of the day are born. In this silence, I, Fabius, son of Fabius, a hereditary unguentarius, a merchant of fragrances, prepare for a conversation with beauty, not with its ideal carved in marble, but with its living, trembling, sweat and fear smelling incarnation. My tools are not the stylus and compass of a sculptor. My tools are smell and memory. And today I invite you not just to listen, but to inhale history, the story of how an entire empire negotiated with its own reflection. Imagine Rome not as a city of marble palaces, but as a city of skin. The skin of tanned peasants bringing vegetables to the market. The skin of soldiers scarred under their armor. The skin of slaves gleaming with sweat and strain. The skin of patricians, lifeless and pale under their togas. And over all of this, a constant, acrid mixture of smells. Hearth smoke, vapors from the cemeteries outside the walls, the aromas of roasted meat from taverns and the stench of cesspits. To be beautiful in Rome meant, first and foremost, to separate oneself from this ammoniac animal reality. And the first step to that was purification. Therefore, our day begins not with a mirror, but with the baths. Not the imperial gigantic ones, but those in every district. Step inside at dawn. The air is humid, heavy, salty with sweat, and sharp with sulfur from underground springs. Allow me to guide you as a newcomer. You pay a quadrans, a small coin, and enter the apoditerium. Here a nervous bustle reigns. A rich patrician removes his tunic, and his slave immediately rubs his shoulders with expensive rosemary oil. The demonstration has already begun. Next to him, a veteran with a scar across his chest groans, taking off worn-out sandals. You, a modest client, feel shy. Don't. Here, everyone is naked, and therefore everyone is equal, but only in appearance. In the apoditerium, the changing room, you hear the muffled hum of voices echoing off the marble walls and the metallic clatter of locker keys. Then you enter the tepidarium, the warm room. Here the body acclimates. Your skin becomes covered with the first sheen of sweat. You see figures around you, blurred by steam, an old man rubbing his aching joints, a youth smugly examining his muscles, a matron surrounded by slave girls carrying scrapers, oils, and sponges in woven baskets. But the true rebirth happens in the caldarium. Heat envelops you like a woolen blanket. Your breath catches. Beads of sweat appear on your forehead, merge and trickle down your temples. You sit on the hot marble and feel your pores opening, releasing everything that accumulated yesterday. Fatigue, remnants of wine, anxieties. It's an almost mystical act, perspiration as confession. A Roman believed that along with sweat, bad thoughts, the phlegm of a foul mood also left. After a while, the depilator, the hair remover, approaches you. In his hands is a vial of thick, sticky paste made of resin, tar, and honey. He applies it to your legs, arms, and chest. Then when the resin hardens slightly, with a sharp movement, rip, he tears it off along with the hair. The pain is sharp but brief, and after it, a feeling of incredible smoothness, as if your skin is feeling the touch of air for the first time. After this, you plunge into the pool of cold water, shock, a gasp that catches your breath. And now when the body screams from the contrast, it's time for the strigil. This curved bronze or bone scraper is your personal architect. You or your slave run it over your skin, and with a light scraping sound, it removes a layer of mixture. Dead skin, congealed sweat, dirt, and residue of oil. After this ritual, a gray, sticky mush remains on the floor, your yesterday's self, and your new body, pink, tingling, incredibly sensitive, is ready for the next step. The body is dried with a rough linen towel. Now it thirsts for moisture. And here my prelude begins. Olive oil, the foundation, but not just any. Oil from the veniferum region was considered the best. Light, almost odorless, a perfect conductor for scents. It was warmed on a small brazier and then enriched. I myself imported from Egypt balsam-like styrax resin, which gave the oil warm vanilla notes. I added nard root from the Himalayas, a bitter, earthy, masculine smell. Or iris petals, soaked in oil for a month so it absorbed their powdery violet aroma, beloved by women. A slave poured this warm, fragrant oil into your palms. You kneaded it and began to rub it in, from feet to thighs, from fingers to shoulders, long and thoroughly. Under your palms, the skin came alive, became firm, began to glow faintly. It wasn't a greasy shine. It was the inner radiance of healthy, cared-for flesh. In the sun, such a body literally sparkled like the pelt of a well-groomed beast. And this radiance was a sign. This person does not work with his hands. He has the time and money for care. He belongs to the civilized world. Smooth, glowing skin was a visual manifesto of Roman urban life, standing in opposition to the rough, hairy nature of barbarians. My shop was on Vicus Unguentarius, but that's a grand name. In reality, a narrow alley where the sun appeared for 2 hours a day. The air here was fixed, like a good wine. Bass notes, the smell of donkey urine from the tannery across the street. It was used as a hair removal agent, yes. Middle notes, dust from crushed marble from the sculptor's workshop, and the top floating notes, mind, floral, spicy animal. Do you know where the base for perfumes comes from? Not from petals. The base is sebum, third-press olive oil, cheap and smelling of frying. It had to be corrected. For a month we soaked it in charcoal and sea salt, then filtered it through wool. Only then did it become oleum, a neutral conductor. The irony? To create the illusion of the unearthly, one first had to conquer the earthly, the most primitive. People came to us for status. A vial of nardinum, oil infused with Himalayan nard, cost as much as a legionary's annual ration. But everyone wanted it precisely because Emperor Tiberius used it in his Capri seclusion. The smell was bitter, medicinal, but it smelled of power and melancholy, the most fashionable disease of high society. I saw how a young dandy, who had barely scraped together enough for a small vial, walked out, straightening his back. He didn't buy a fragrance. He bought for an hour the shadow of an imperial persona. Funny? Insane. But haven't you seen something similar in our marketplaces? And here's another scene. A widow of a not-too-wealthy equestrian comes to me after a year of mourning. By law, she can already remove her dark clothes, but the eyes of the city are still upon her. I need something unnoticeable, but so they understand I'm back in the ranks, she says. I create for her a perfume based on Melissa, bee balm smelling of lemon and honey, the scent of home, coziness, fertility. Not provocative, but saying, I am ready for a new marriage. She pays and leaves. A month later, I see her in the entourage of her patron's new wife. She smells of my Melissa. Success, she was sold like a batch of goods, And my scent was part of the packaging. Beauty, my friend, was often just a liquid asset. And now let's follow the morning of a noble matron, Domitia. She is 25, married to an aging senator. Her face is not her property. It is a showcase of his success. She is awakened not by light, but by the voice of the ornatrix, the hairdressing slave, Chloe. Mistress, today there's a reception at the prefect's wife. You need a toothless hairstyle and eyes like Juno's. Domitia groans. Yesterday it was the tower hairstyle, and her head still hurts. First, the mask. The slave Seriata, a cosmetics specialist, brings a casket. From it, she takes out cerussa, white lead paste. A new recipe, mistress, with crushed pearl for radiance, she says flatteringly. Domitia closes her eyes. Seriata applies the paste with a brush made from squirrel tail hair. Layer by layer, the face turns into an immobile, white mask. Domitia cannot smile, cannot frown. She is a doll, then rouge, but not simple. For today, the color of fresh blood is needed, a symbol of her husband's vitality. Expensive purpurea paste from murex snails, diluted to pink, is used. This is a political statement. Our family can afford to paint our cheeks with money from sea trade. Eyes. Here lies freedom. Today, not just antimony. Today, glaucoma. Green eyeshadow from malachite. It's a risk. Green is the color of Venus, seduction. But it is also the color of the Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, a symbol of intelligence and dangerous independence. Domitia whispers, "Make them." Speaking. Seriata smiles understandingly. She adds the thinnest golden line along the eyelid. The gaze becomes expensive and complex. And now the irony. While Domitia is turning into a goddess, her husband, the senator, in the next room, suffers from gout and rubs his temples with cheap bay oil. His ideal of beauty is healthy gums and no bad breath. Her ideal is unattainable perfection. Their marriage is a union of two completely different kinds of luxury. His, power, hers, appearance. And Chloe begins her work. Her tools are laid out like a surgeon's. Iron curling rods, calamistry, of different diameters, bone hairpins, golden threads, combs of ivory, and all for parting strands. Mistress, fashion now is not height, but volume at the back, says Chloe, winding a strand onto a heated rod. The air smells of burnt hair. Domitia winces. Empress Sabina wears this, adds Chloe. It speaks of solidity. The key word has been spoken. One must look not just fashionable, but conservatively fashionable. Politics. Chloe works in silence, with the concentration of a sapper. She creates a complex structure of braids, twists, and added curls. Hair from a Germanic slave girl bought specifically for this. Each element is secured with dozens of pins. The weight of the hairstyle is like that of a light helmet. Suddenly, Chloe stops. Mistress, a gray hair. Domitia's heart stops. Gray hair at 25. Disgrace, ruin, the end. Pluck it, she orders, and her voice trembles. With a quick movement of tweezers, Chloe removes the treacherous hair and immediately weaves in its place a dark curl from the reserve. Catastrophe averted, but Domitia can no longer relax. Her beauty is a besieged fortress, and time is the main enemy. And now imagine another scene. In the next room, the slave cook, Big Martha, is washing. She scoops water from a tub and pours it over her head. Her hair, thick, dark, with streaks of gray, falls in heavy strands. She rubs it with a piece of coarse alkaline soap, washing away kitchen grease and soot. Then she simply braids it into a thick, practical braid. Her hair works. It doesn't speak of status. It protects her neck from the heat of the hearth. This is a different beauty, the beauty of functionality and endurance. And it, believe me, is far more durable than Chloe's masterpiece. And now, my friend, set aside for a moment the image of a Roman woman. Let's look at her companion. Do you think men in Rome had it easier? Oh, that's a misconception. Their beauty was an even more sophisticated trap, for it had to look accidental. As if this fitness, this polish, this healthy glow were a gift of nature, not the fruit of thousands of hours in the palestra and at the barber's. Take, for instance, shaving. In the early republic, a beard was a symbol of courage and philosophy. But since the time of Scipio Africanus, who introduced the fashion for smooth cheeks, a beard became a sign of a barbarian or mourning. The procedure was risky. A personal slave tonsor sharpened a razor on a strap, then ran it quickly over the master's face. The slightest tremor, and a cut. To stop the bleeding, they used spider webs or powder from dried fly agaric mushrooms. Seneca sarcastically wrote of a rich man who hired a whole legion of tonsors, one for the right cheek, another for the left, a third for the chin, and a fourth standing ready with a sponge and balm. And all this so the skin would remain smooth like a youth's. After shaving, moisturizing, but not with feminine floral oils. A man had to smell of wood, earth, war. Therefore, oils infused with cedar, cypress, wormwood, or libanotus, wild rosemary that smelled of smoke and bitter greenery, were used. This scent said, "I spend my days not in a boudoir, but in the Senate or on the march." The body. The ideal male body was athletic, but not over-muscled. Excessive musculature was a sign of a slave gladiator or a porter. A noble Roman was to have a toned body that spoke of exercise in the palestra, but not of physical labor. Therefore, young patricians spent hours with the halteres, lead weights, but never to exhaustion, and always followed by massage and the strigil. Hair on the head, a separate drama. Fashion changed. From the short, neat cuts of Augustus, he himself was balding and thus introduced the fashion for short hair, to the curly manes of Nero, which they say were a wig. Baldness was a catastrophe. There were hundreds of recipes to fight it. Pliny the Elder recommends rubbing in pigeon dung mixed with honey, others ash from burnt bees or wild boar fat. The results, of course, were nil. Julius Caesar, embarrassed by his baldness, combed his sparse strands forward and gladly accepted the right to constantly wear a laurel wreath, not only as a symbol of triumph, but also as a screen. Imagine, the greatest commander, conqueror of Gaul, is self-conscious about a receding hairline. What can be said of ordinary mortals? Male cosmetics existed, but were a shadow practice. Pallor after a night of drinking was masked with light rouge made from crushed dates. Bags under the eyes, with cumin compresses. To make the gaze seem clearer, they subtly lined their eyes with antimony. But admitting to this was impossible. The poet Martial sharply ridiculed a certain macer. "You are blushing? It cannot be, for your cheeks are covered with so thick a layer of feminine white lead that shame simply cannot break through it to the surface." Yes, male beauty in Rome was a game of giveaway. Spend a fortune and time to look as if you spent neither. Beauty in Rome was not just an art, it was a medical pathology. Gaius Marcellus, a Greek physician, often visited me. He laughed at my work. "You, Fabius, treat the soul with smells, while I observe how your clients kill themselves for the sake of your very creations," he told horrors. Lead white caused anemia, kidney failure, and lead colic, hellish abdominal pains. Women grew pale, not from cosmetics, but from poisoning. The ideal pallor is, in essence, a symptom, Gaius said. We admire a sign of chronic intoxication, an antimony for the eyes. It was often adulterated, with lead sheen added. It caused inflammation, blindness. Cinnabar for lips, a mercury mineral, led to tremors, memory loss, madness. "You know," Gaius said, sipping my best wine, "the most fashionable woman in Rome is, by my observations, a walking diagnosis. She has Saturnism, lead poisoning, hydrargyria, mercury poisoning, and hysteria from the impossibility of matching her own reflection. She is treated by applying fragrant substances to her womb. The irony? She is being poisoned through the skin by the very same things. And he was right. We created an ideal that physically destroyed its adherents. Beauty was a symbiont parasite. It fed on health to shine brighter. My most expensive perfume, Tears of Isis, contained a tincture of bitter almond. In large doses, it's cyanide. In small, it gave dizziness, blush, a sparkle in the eyes. The effect of living, excited beauty? Clients paid in gold for a tiny regulated dose of poison. Is this not the highest form of irony? We pay for what slowly kills us and call it self-care. But the best philosopher in my life was not the Greek physician, but an old slave, Livius, who looked after the storerooms. He was over 70, his back bent, his face carved with wrinkles like a map of all the hardships he had lived through. Once I caught him cleaning an old bronze strigil. "Look, Fabius," he said without raising his head. "Smooth. It scraped the skin of patricians for 50 years. It removed dirt, sweat, grease from them. And where did all that go? Evaporated? No, it's here, in the pores of the metal." He ran his finger along the groove. "All the beauty of Rome is in this residue. Dirt turned into ritual." He told how in his youth, as a cosmos in a rich house, he prepared a bath for his mistress. She demanded that rose petals float in a special pattern, a spiral. I spent an hour laying them out with tweezers. She entered, glanced, and swept them away with her hand. "Bored," she said. And I watched the petals sink and thought, here it is, the ideal, an hour of labor for a moment of caprice. And that's the whole point. Not in beauty, but in the possibility of destroying it, because tomorrow there will be a new one. Livius said that true beauty lies in the unnoticeable effort that holds the world together. The beauty of a correctly stacked woodpile that won't collapse in winter. The beauty of a swept clean threshold. The beauty of the skill with which a blacksmith strikes with a hammer. "Your matrons," he smirked, "think beauty is what's visible. But I know beauty is what everything falls apart without. And that is never on display." Before his death, he asked me, "When I die, burn me with a handful of rosemary and laurel, cheap and smells of food and memory. No need for your overseas curiosities." I fulfilled his request. The smoke from his pyre smelled honest, and that was the noblest scent I ever created. Now let's return to the baths, but look at them as a model of the entire empire. Here was its own rigid, invisible code, which everyone knew but no one voiced. The schedule divided the day into castes. From dawn to the third hour, round 9 a.m., time for the sick and elderly. They came to treat rheumatism in the warm water. From the third to the sixth hour, until noon, time for the nobility. They were in no hurry, exercise negotiated. From the sixth to the ninth hour, until 3 p.m., time for merchants and artisans. They washed quickly, busily. After the ninth hour, time for the plebs and slaves. The water by then was already murky, but the entrance price was halved. In the apoditerium, the changing room, a special hierarchy reigned. A rich man removed his tunic, and his slave immediately rubbed his back with expensive cypress oil. The demonstration began at the threshold. Next to him, a veteran living on a pension grunted, taking off worn sandals. You, a modest client, felt shy? In vain. Here, everyone was naked, and therefore visibly equal, but only visibly. By how the slave dried his master, by the quality of his towel, by the smell of the oil. Everything was read like an open book. The palestra, the sports ground, was a theater of vanity. Young men made a few ritual movements with the halteres, then breathed noisily, demonstrating effort. But the real goal was not the exercises, but the subsequent ritual. A slave poured oil over his master, then scraped him with the strigil. This was a performance of purity. The scraping of bronze on skin sounded like a mark of quality. The caldarium, the hot room, a place of trial. Temperatures nearing 70 degrees. Breathing felt like swallowing hot wool. Here, people sat in silence, listening to sweat drip onto the marble floor. Some, wanting to show endurance, competed to see who could sit longer. There were even fatal outcomes. Pliny the Younger mentions an old man who died of heat stroke right on the bench. His beauty, or rather the struggle for its illusion, became his final feat. And now imagine the pool. People didn't swim in it. They stood, holding conversations. The water, changed once a day, turned into a thick broth of oils, sweat, dead skin, and street dirt brought in on feet by evening. Wits joke that in the baths of Caracalla, one could gain weight just by stepping into the water. But even this filth was democratic. A senator and his cobbler splashed in it, for a time, until the gong sounded, announcing the change of session. Not everyone could afford lead, white and myrrh oils. But the desire to be beautiful, to fit in, it lived even in the poorest quarters of the Subura. And here, folk ingenuity came into play. White lead for a poor girl. This was crushed chalk from the banks of the Tiber, mixed with water or vinegar. It lay unevenly, shed white dust onto the dark tunic, but at least somewhat hid the tan and freckles. Rouge, beet juice, or crushed elderberries. They gave an uneven, quick-to-fade color, but were safe. Eyeshadow, ordinary soot from the hearth, mixed with goose fat. Black, thick. It emphasized the eyes, though it smudged by noon. Hair was lightened by sitting on the roof under the scorching sun with hair soaked in lemon juice or vinegar. The result was unpredictable, from a light shade to reddish patches. For curling, they used metal sticks heated on coals. Burns often occurred, and then an ointment of plantain and lard was used. Perfumes were simple, homemade. An infusion of rosemary and cheap olive oil, a decoction of lavender and vinegar, used both as perfume and a lice remedy. The most popular remedy, sassin, a mixture of powdered orris root, coriander, and salt. It was worn in a pouch around the neck and masked the smell of sweat. But even here there was hierarchy. The wife of a successful baker could afford real antimony for 2 sesterces. The water carrier's daughter, only soot. And yet, watching them, I sometimes caught myself thinking that their beauty, devoid of artificiality, was more honest. They weren't trying to look like marble statues. They were trying to look like the best versions of themselves, healthy, neat, ready for work. Their hands covered in scratches and calluses, their faces weathered by the sun. This was the beauty of life, not its negation. And there was another special caste, actresses and dancers. They came from the lower classes, but their beauty was a commodity. They spent their last money on cosmetics, for their face was capital. They were the first to learn of new trends from abroad, and often became trendsetters for the wealthier. Their beauty was a weapon of survival, and in that lay its tragic elegance. My workshop was not just a shop. It was an alchemical workshop and an intelligence outpost. Ingredients flowed here from across the oikumene, and each told its story. Myrrh and frankincense arrived from Arabia on camels driven across the desert for months. The resins were of different quality. Stacte, the highest grade of myrrh, transparent as a tear, and bitter myrrh, the lowest grade for the poor. They were tested by burning. Good myrrh burned with an even white smoke and a sweetish smell. Bad, crackled and smelled of burnt rubber. Saffron crocus stigmas came from Cilicia. It was adulterated by mixing in marigold petals dyed with turmeric. To spot a fake, I threw a pinch into warm water. Real saffron colored it golden slowly and evenly. A fake gave an instant yellow burst. Roses from Paestum were the best in the empire. They were grown on slopes facing the sea and collected before sunrise, before the dew evaporated. The petals were placed in clay vessels with sesame oil and buried in the ground for 40 days for infusion. This method was called enfleurage in the cellar. But the king of all ingredients was ambergris, a grayish, waxy substance found in the intestines of sperm whales. The sea washed it ashore on the coasts of Africa and Arabia. Its scent was unique, marine, animal, yet noble. It fixed fragrances, making them long-lasting. Its origin was a mystery, giving rise to myths. Was it droppings of giant birds or tears of mermaids? I bought it from Phoenician merchants, a clever and dishonest folk. They often adulterated ambergris with wax and musk. To test, I heated a piece on a silver spoon over coals. Real ambergris melted, emitting a deep, complex bouquet. A fake smoked and smelled of burnt horn. Contraband was the lifeblood of my profession. Some ingredients, for example, Chinese cassia, cinnamon, were a state monopoly. But demand created supply. I knew a Greek, Nicias, who smuggled cassia in the false bottom of amphorae filled with olive oil. Once customs officers in Ostia caught him. He bribed them, giving up half the goods, but lost an eye in a fight. Fabius, he said later, pressing a vinegar-soaked cloth to his face. The smell of freedom smells of danger, but without danger, freedom is no joy. He supplied me with the best nard from Himalayan valleys, which was 3 times cheaper than the official one. Risk? Yes, but profit covered everything. And there was another dark side, magical ingredients. Some clients asked to add to perfumes bat's blood to attract love, powder from a dried lizard's heart for fidelity, ash from burnt enemy's hair for a curse. I, as a rational man, refused. But my competitor, the Syrian Abdagar, made such potions for big money. They said one matron paid him a whole silver ingot for a vial of perfume with dust from her beloved's sandals. Ridiculous? Perhaps. But that was Rome in a nutshell. Superstition wrapped in silk and fragrance. What awaited those who dedicated their life to the cult of beauty when time began to take its toll? For a woman, social death. An old matron, if she had no influential children, turned into a shadow. Her place at the table was taken by young daughters-in-law. Her opinion was no longer asked. Her lot became wool and prayer, symbolic occupations to busy her hands and mind. Some fought to the end. They increased layers of white lead, but lead only accelerated aging. The skin thinned, became covered with a network of wrinkles and sores. They wove more false locks into their hair, but the contrast between their own gray hair and the shiny black curls of slaves became comical. The poet Juvenal viciously mocked such an old woman. She puts on so many layers of ointment that her face does not live, but wears a mask. She is like a wall that has been plastered many times, and now the plaster is falling off in chunks. Others accepted with dignity. My client Cornelia, once the first beauty, at 70 came to me for simple rose oil. "You know, Fabius," she said once, "I no longer want a smell of youth. I want to smell like a rose that has bloomed but still remembers the sun." She accepted her autumn, and in that acceptance was more beauty than in her past triumphs. Men age differently. Gray hair and wrinkles added auctoritas and gravitas to them. An old senator with a face furrowed with wrinkles like a map of military campaigns commanded respect. But they too had to fight. Gout twisted their fingers. Prostatitis tormented them at night. Teeth fell out. Pliny the Elder in his Natural History gives advice. Chew frankincense to strengthen gums. Drink an infusion of fern for joint pain. The effect, I tell you, was close to zero. The philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote in his diaries, "Soon you will forget everything, and everything will forget you." He urged accepting old age as a natural part of life. But even he, speaking before the people, tinted his gray hair with dark henna. The image of an eternal, youthful ruler was important for politics. Even a sage played this game. And what of the poor? They had no time for the drama of aging. They worked until their last breath. Their old age was measured not by wrinkles, but by inability to work. When an old porter could no longer lift a basket, his fate was unenviable. Begging or death in a poorhouse. Their beauty faded quickly, roughly, without rituals. But perhaps there was honesty in that. Roman ideals of beauty, like Roman laws, were exported to the provinces. But colliding with local traditions, they bent in bizarre ways. In Gaul, local women were famous for their light, thick hair. They washed it with a decoction of soapwort root and lightened it by sitting in the sun with honey in their hair. Roman women envied this natural shine but considered Gallic customs barbaric. Yet Gallic slave ornatresses were worth their weight in gold precisely for their skill with such hair. Irony, conquerors hired the conquered to teach them how to beautify themselves. In Egypt, traditions of self-care were millennia older than Rome's. Egyptian women used kohl not only for beauty, but as protection from the sun and eye infections. They made creams from aloe and beeswax that actually moisturized the skin rather than poisoning it. Roman ladies finding themselves in Alexandria greedily adopted these recipes but adapted them to their aesthetic terror. They added lead white to Egyptian creams to achieve the correct pallor. In Britain, in the cold north, Roman colonists faced a problem. Their oils and creams froze. They had to switch to denser animal fats, bear and badger. The locals, the Britons, painted their bodies with blue woad in complex patterns. To the Romans, this was savagery, a sign of barbarians. But legionaries who served on the frontier for 20 years adopted this habit. Tattoos became a sign of brotherhood and memory of campaigns. The command fought it, but in vain. The beauty of barbarians proved stronger than discipline. Provincial nobility desperately tried to imitate the capital's fashion, but often overdid it. A senator from Tarraco might wear a toga with a purple border wider than allowed. His wife construct a hairstyle 1.5 times taller than the Roman norm and adorn it with all her gold at once. Capital dandies, seeing such a one, rolled with laughter. Juvenal sarcastically wrote of a provincial who carries on his head not a hairstyle, but an entire perfume shop. But there was another side. Provinces gifted Rome with new ideas. Gallic soap, a mixture of ash and animal fat, was first considered a barbaric oddity, but legionaries appreciated its effectiveness on campaign, and gradually it came into use. The Germanic habit of washing in icy water was recognized as beneficial for hardening. Rome, having conquered the world, found itself conquered by the everyday trifles of subjugated peoples. Roman history is full of examples where beauty, this coveted gift, became a curse, a trap, a tool of self-destruction. Take Valeria Messalina, the third wife of Emperor Claudius. Contemporaries described her as a woman of incredible, almost divine beauty. But this beauty became a weapon in her hands, a weapon of immorality and cruelty. She used her appearance to manipulate, seduce, and ruin. In the end, her conspiracy was uncovered, and her beauty did not save her from execution. Legend has it that the executioner, ordered to kill her, hesitated, struck by her face. Then she herself took the sword and directed it into her chest. Her perfect skin was no shield against steel. Or Papilia, a noble matron so proud of her skin that she willed to be buried in an open coffin so all could admire her perfection one last time. Her will was executed, but after a day, the corpse began to decompose, and beauty turned to horror, making those present flee in terror. The moral? Even death did not stop her vanity. And here's the story of Socrates, a Greek of course, but Romans revered him. He was ugly by ancient standards, snub-nosed with bulging eyes, pot-bellied, went barefoot. But his inner beauty, wisdom, and strength of spirit still inspire the world. Roman Stoics often recalled him, but in practice preferred external polish. Irony, an ugly philosopher, became the standard of inner beauty, which everyone admired but no one wanted to emulate. In my practice, there was a tragic case. A young slave girl, Callisto, was incredibly beautiful, so beautiful that people turned to look at her on the street. Her master, a freedman who grew rich on grain supplies, fell madly in love with her. His jealous wife, ugly and spiteful, ordered a maid to pour vitriol oil, sulfuric acid, on Callisto's face. I tried to help, applying all the balms I knew, but the scars were horrifying. Callisto lost everything, her beauty, her master's favor, who upon seeing her, turned away in disgust, her hope for a better life. In one night, she turned from the ornament of the house into a scarecrow. A week later, she committed suicide by throwing herself into the Tiber. Her beauty became her death sentence. And after this, will anyone still say that beauty is a blessing? Now that I, old Fabius, have lived a long life and seen thousands of faces, I look at this whole carousel with a quiet, sad smile. I have seen fashion go in circles, high hairstyles replaced by low ones, pallor by blush, shaven faces by beards. What remains? Only the human desire to be accepted, loved, significant, and the fear to be rejected, unworthy, superfluous. The moon looks into my workshop window. It has seen empires born and die, beauties bloom and wither, millions of people laugh and cry. It shines evenly and calmly, requiring neither white lead, nor rouge, nor complex hairstyles. Its light is the light of acceptance. It accepts the world as it is, with all its fuss and vanity. So where am I leading you with all this, my weary friend? To the fact that you and I have not come so far. We have exchanged lead white for SPF foundation, the strigil for fancy razors, and my perfumes for chemical aldehydes in glass bottles. But the drama is the same. We trade our time, health, nerves for a place in the hierarchy of gazes. But tonight, let's declare a truce. The empire of your anxiety can wait. Let's make a pact, like two conspirators. First clause. You acknowledge that the ideal is a collective hallucination. The Romans hallucinated smooth skin and towers of hair. We hallucinate something of our own, and both are equally far from the simple fact. You have a body that breathes and is tired. Second clause. You temporarily resign your commission as a centurion in the army of self-improvement. No battles with wrinkles, gray hair, the shape of your nose. For this night, you are a deserter, and that is honorable. Place like a Roman an imaginary strigil by your bed, and mentally scrape off with it your entire day. Conversations, screens, expectations, failures. Let that remain on the floor, like a gray mush that an invisible slave will clean up in the morning. Your self beneath it is pink, new, and owes no one a shine. Third clause, you allow yourself to smell of yourself, not of flowers, nor of forests, nor of oceans from advertisements. The smell of clean skin, a warm blanket, peace. And now listen, this is not music, it is the silence that follows. This silence is older than Rome. It was here before the first Roman rubbed himself with oil, and it will remain when the last vial of perfume crumbles to dust. In this silence, there are no evaluations, no ideals, no competition. In it, there is only peace and the space to be, not beautiful, not ugly, simply existing. And in this, I am sure, lies that very elusive eternal beauty that all my clients sought and never found in my vials. It was always with them, as it is now, with you. And this piece is the most expensive and rarest perfume you can possibly afford. It is not for sale. It is within you. Just allow it to unfold. Allow yourself to accept yourself. Right now, with all the little wrinkles, scars, imperfections, with today's fatigue. You are a living person, breathing, feeling, seeking peace. And that is already beautiful. Moreover, it is enough. Just close your eyes and allow the centuries-long Roman marathon after the ideal to finally end at your doorstep. You are already home. You are already enough. Sleep well, and may your dreams be light, like rose petals carried by the wind of time into eternity, which doesn't care whether you were beautiful or not. It only matters that you were, and that you are, and all the rest is just dust on the sandals of history.